Alright, let's address the elephant in the room. So a lot of you guys who have been following me for a while have probably noticed that I've barely posted any Overwatch content in a hot minute, and yes, I'll admit I've been a bit too addicted to Marvel Rivals. To answer the question of whether I'm quitting Overwatch for Marvel Rivals, the short answer is no, I'm not. I'm still gonna be enjoying both, but right now I really am enjoying Rivals a lot more than Overwatch, which is why I've been spending so much time playing it and making content for it. Now, people have been constantly asking me if I think Marvel Rivals is the Overwatch killer, so I thought it's time to finally make this video, settle the debate once and for all, and just have a candid conversation of how I feel about both games going forward, especially now that it's a new year, and I believe that Marvel Rivals is genuinely the first hero shooter that has come along since Overwatch launched all the way back in 2016 that is actual competition for it. Before we continue, I know some of you are diehard loyal Overwatch fans who don't like Marvel Rivals and think, why compare them at all, just enjoy both? But the reality is, a lot of Overwatch players, including myself and a lot of my friends who have been very burnt out from Overwatch or found that it's been stale, have switched over to Marvel Rivals and found that it does a lot of things better than Overwatch that we wish Overwatch would do or bring back. I don't think any game is going to kill Overwatch just purely because of its fan base and the legacy that it has built as a game. I do see both games in different lanes, however they share the same space, so it's not really apples and oranges because apples don't compete with oranges, and right now Marvel Rivals is directly competing with Overwatch. All you have to do is look at the recent Winter Wonderland event for Overwatch. When was the last time they were generous enough to give out 3 free legendary skins as rewards without it being paywalled? I don't think that's a coincidence. But putting that aside, I do think competition is a great thing. I'm sure all of us want what's best for Overwatch and its players, and now with the release of Marvel Rivals, I think it's good to talk about things that it might do better than Overwatch so that feedback is out there, and hopefully the devs can maybe implement it in some sort of way and make Overwatch a better game. Also, this video is unscripted. I don't have anything in front of me besides some notes, so I apologize in advance if it's a bit all over the place. But what I do want to do is compare these two games in a few key areas, especially now that Marvel Rivals has been out for almost a month, and hopefully create some discussion on how these games can improve each other going forward. Alright, so firstly and most importantly, let's talk about the gameplay. So Marvel Rivals is third person whereas Overwatch is first person, and that automatically creates a completely different feel. I think Overwatch feels more like a traditional shooter because of this, and so the gunplay and abilities do feel a bit more immersive simply because of that first person aspect. But on the other hand, being able to see your character in action in Marvel Rivals does fulfill that superhero fantasy, and so that also feels very satisfying. It's just different. The main thing I want to point out, and I know it's not just me that's been saying this, is that Marvel Rivals is bringing back that feeling that Overwatch first had when it came out. That feeling of just 6v6 fun where every character feels impactful and strong in their own right, and that everyone has an important role to play in the game. With Overwatch, I do feel like 5v5 has greatly impacted how people enjoy the game, especially now that tank is a one-person role. I've said this so many times, but right now Overwatch ranked is so frustrating, especially when you get games where your tank just simply gets outplayed by the enemy tank and you feel like you can do nothing. Don't get me wrong, this has also happened in Marvel Rivals, but I think that because there's a lack of role queue and more flexibility with what your team runs, it hasn't felt nearly as hopeless as it does in Overwatch. I did try the 6v6 playtest in Overwatch, by the way, and it did feel marginally better than 5v5, but it still didn't capture the same sort of just enjoyment that I had back in Overwatch 1. And the lack of a competitive mode just made it feel a little bit pointless and boring after a couple of games, which is why I haven't really made a video on it. To add to this, all the balancing and changes the devs have made over the years have made certain heroes feel unplayable or that they barely exist at all, and that it's impossible to get any value out of picking them. Now, talking about role queue, I think Marvel Rivals has reminded a lot of people just how fun the game is when there's no restrictions in terms of what team compositions you can have. It works surprisingly well, and I really don't think the game needs it in the future, although I think the devs should implement some sort of role limit so there's only a maximum of, say, 3 duelists on a team. The next thing I want to talk about are the character designs and their abilities. For the most part, I think Marvel Rivals has done an excellent job in bringing these established iconic characters into a video game. Most of the characters' abilities make sense with their background and their lore, the visual effects look great, and everyone feels really fun to play. I really have no complaints, and I'm really excited to see what characters they're bringing in the future, and I've heard rumors, we don't talk about leaks here by the way, they're going to be adding multiple characters in Season 1. I mean, Overwatch could never. Although to Overwatch's credit, they do have to design all their characters from scratch because they're brand new, whereas Marvel already has a vast library of characters that have already been established to choose from, so they don't really have to think about the design or anything. They just need to give them the Marvel Rivals makeover and then add them to the game. I do still think Overwatch should add more heroes because at this rate, I think we're only going to get a couple new ones in 2025 unless something changes, whereas Marvel Rivals is going to be adding a lot. Also, one thing I want to mention is that Overwatch is kind of limited because it's still rooted somewhat in like futuristic realism, so their characters can't really have magic or anything like that, whereas Marvel doesn't have that kind of restriction. So that also makes me a bit more excited to see what characters and abilities they add to this game. As for skins and cosmetics, I can't really compare Overwatch and Marvel Rivals because we know that Overwatch has always been on its A game when it comes to cosmetics and skins. They just look really good. The skins in Marvel Rivals also look really good, and I love that they can draw inspiration from the movies, the comics, as well as come up with brand new concepts. Actually no, one thing I do appreciate about Marvel Rivals is that you can actually see the skins while you're playing, which is not something that you can do in Overwatch unless you're emoting. But even though the skins in Overwatch are incredible, Marvel Rivals is just way more consumer friendly, especially with the monetization. The battle pass is way more generous and gives you more premium currency. For the price of a single legendary skin in Overwatch, you can pretty much get a whole bundle in Marvel Rivals, which includes the skin, a custom MVP animation, an emote, name card, and a spray. So yeah, hopefully this sends a message to the Overwatch team to lower their prices, otherwise people are just gonna like switch and just like spend their money on Marvel Rivals instead. As for visuals, I think both games are incredibly polished, but Overwatch is still on another level, and I don't think any other game has really come close in terms of the same kind of style. I've always said that Overwatch looks like a Pixar movie in a video game, and it still looks surprisingly current even though it's been out for years. Rivals has opted for a more stylized comic book aesthetic, which I think works really well for the game. When the game was first shown, I think some people said it looked like a mobile game, which I completely disagree with. It's actually surprisingly polished when you really pay attention to the details, although I will say some of the UI elements and text looks a bit cheap, so maybe that contributes to it looking a bit less premium. Overall, both games look fantastic, but Overwatch does have that extra Blizzard polish. As for sound design, I think Marvel Rivals is serviceable, but I have noticed inconsistencies when it comes to voice lines and in-game audio cues. I also think some of the characters' voice lines are quite cringy and cheesy, but like not in a good way compared to Overwatch. So yeah, I think the audio is a bit crunchy in Rivals, whereas in Overwatch it's pretty great for the most part. The last area I want to touch on is just general perception of both games. As we know, Marvel Rivals is brand new, so it's still in a honeymoon phase and everyone is hyping it up, trying it out and getting on board, whereas the perception of Overwatch has been pretty much the opposite of that. I mean, some of it is deserved. Overwatch has had many missteps and just bad management over its lifetime. And even though the Overwatch team has nothing to do with the other issues at Blizzard, that has also affected people's perception of the game in general. So yeah, a lot of people are taking this opportunity to use Marvel Rivals, even though it is an amazing game, purely just to shit on Overwatch even more. Despite all this though, I think Overwatch will be fine and that it's not going to see end of service anytime soon or anything like that. I think it's more of a question of just how popular and relevant Overwatch is going to stay, especially with a game like Marvel Rivals competing with it. I definitely do think Rivals will have longevity. I mean, it's freaking Marvel. And so far, the devs have seemed pretty receptive to feedback by the community. So if they continue that, I think the game will do very well. In turn, I hope this lights a fire up Overwatch's behind. I think that for too long, Overwatch has been resting on its laurels and thinking that it's untouchable, but now there's finally a worthy competitor, so it'll be interesting to see just how this changes the direction of the game going forward. That's my 2 cents on this topic. I'd love to hear your thoughts as well, so let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good day.